And so today what we're going to do, I'll tell you, I wanted to do a sermon on this. I just couldn't fit it under 3 hours. And so what I decided to do is break it up over 3 weeks. So today we're going to talk about some stuff. It's going to feel like an intro. And if you're like, man, that felt like an intro, there's an ellipses, it's because it is. And so we're going to pick up next week. And then on Father's Day, we're going to wrap it up. But today what we're going to do is kind of get us into this. Now, we talk about what makes a man. Often we're talking about some version of masculinity, right? Now, masculinity is one of these, again, fascinating things, because it's not just an atypical, or it's not just like a fictional way of thinking about it, right? And you know it's not, because any man that you've ever talked to has a view of what this looks like. And any woman that you've ever talked to often has a view of what this looks like, and it sets some sort of expectations, right? So I put in mind to say it this way: like, masculinity ultimately is important because it shapes sons' identities, right? It'll shape the identity of what a son is and what he thinks about life and himself. But it also shapes a daughter's expectations, which is really important, right? Like, now, some of you grew up in a home without a father, like I did. So I didn't have my dad in the home at any point in my life, right? And so my mom was very intentional. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but very intentional about having me like around coaches or around other people, or like constantly around other men. And what I found was there were common threads amongst a lot of these men, but they were all very unique and different in their personalities. And what I also found as a young boy, right, and I think most men in the room can attest to this, I found myself emulating certain parts of their personality, right? Their approach to life and the way they saw the world without even thinking about it, right? This is something that happens with a lot of boys. Now, this happens with women too, but I would say certainly with boys around men. Like, you adopt often what you see when you're really young. Like, so I went on a camping trip when I was really young. I'd never been on a camping trip before. I think I was like 7, 8 years old. And I'll never forget, there was a handful of guys from our church, and they were all going with their sons, and I didn't have a dad with me on the trip. And so I was kind of like with one of my best friends and his dad. And they started to like fish, right? But like real fish, you know what I'm talking about? Like, they were like out on a boat fishing, and I'm on the boat. And here's what was so fascinating. They had done this since they were like 3, 4, 5 years old. I'd seen it, but I had never done it. And so I realized at the end of it, I was like, there was a hook. Now, this sounds so funny. It's not that I'm super compassionate about fish. I mean, I eat salmon every week. I'm a huge fan of that. But I was like, wait a minute. We're gonna hook a fish mouth, and then we're going to pull it back. And they're like, yeah. And then we're going to throw it back. I was like, well, you're going to put it back and we're not going to eat it? They're like, no. And I was like, well, I didn't want to just eat it raw, but that felt like a bad idea to me. And they're like, so we're going to hook it just to look at it, and then we're going to throw it back. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then they grunted. You know what I'm saying? So like, that was the whole interaction. I was like, that was kind of a weird thing, right? I remember the same thing happened to me older in life. I remember the first time I ever went hunting with anybody. And I went with another leader that I know. He's in his 60s. He's been hunting with his dad. His dad was a hunter, and his dad was a hunter, and his dad was a hunter, right? Which I think takes us to the American Revolution. Anyway, I don't know. So it goes all the way back. But he had been hunting, and I'll never forget. So we went, and we did the whole thing. It was like birds, and I'll never forget. Like, the first time, like I shot a bird, and they, 2 men in their 60s. I kid you not, they both got really emotional. So I shot it. I felt weird. I was like, that feels like a weird thing. This is a weird experience. And then they both, 2 men in their 60s, got very emotional, walk up to me, and like with tears, they hug me like, what a great shot. And I'm like, I feel very mixed right now about what's happening. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, this is so cool to get that kind of affirmation. And I looked up and what a man. But I was like, I used to step on ants sometimes, but I've never done anything like this. And they brought it back. I was like, some of it, I didn't understand. And there's this weird thing. And here's what's weird about it. There are masculinity scripts that we all have, right? Now, I don't even think whether it was bad. I don't think there's something bad with that. But I was going like, they had stories connected to other men in their life that shaped and formed them. And this was around hunting, right? Now, there are hundreds of those things. Some of you did this with video games with your dad. Some of you did this with sports, right? Some of you did this all sorts of areas. But in this particular one, I thought, like, I feel conflicted because I didn't grow up around it. And also, it is a fascinating experience to get that much affirmation from a man, even when you're 29 is how old I was, right? There's something about this so that we can all be on the same page. When we talk about masculinity, what we're talking about specifically is this. There's a set of attributes, behaviors, and roles that are generally, and I mean this generally, associated with men and with boys, right? Now, let me give you a couple of caveats, right? Throughout this series, there are going to be times where I'm speaking specifically to men, and some of you who are women in the room are going to go, wait a minute, women can do that and be that too. And I'll just say this, for a lot of what I'm going to talk about, I agree with you. So this is not saying only men are this and you are never this. That's not it at all. I'm talking to the guys, right? And so if I could have just gathered all the guys, I would, but I didn't think they were all going to come, so I just put them right here. So this is for men, but it's not saying that women aren't some of these things too, right? Now, and at the same time, and we'll talk about this, there are specific areas that I do think God designed us differently. We'll talk about that as well, right? But as we talk about this, I want you to be thinking about the men in your life, the boys in your life specifically as we talk about it. Now, the question that we're going to start with around masculinity is this one right now, right here, and that's who handed you your script of what masculinity is? A lot of times this gets taught as if it's inherited, which is fascinating to me. That boys just know that they should go do this thing. Now, there are times where I'm like, you put a boy in the woods with a stick and they're gonna beat something up. Is that true? For some boys, but not all, right? There's part of this where a lot of it's inherited, but then a lot of it is intuitive too. Like this is where you go, there are parts where they just know some things at times, some boys do. And there's a part where so much of it's handed down. And the more complex thought around this, which I think is even more fascinating, is that a lot of times the masculinity that a man moves through his life with is in response to the good or the bad character of the men that were in his life throughout it, right? And so this is what's so fascinating about this. When you look at a 27-year-old guy and you look at what are the attributes of him as a man, you get into this and you go well, there's a lot of different ones, but if you were to dig, often you find that there are pieces that were intuitive, a lot that was inherited, and a lot that was a response to all of us. When you grow up a lot of times and you're around men, it feels like sometimes this is draped over you. Like if you had a dad in the home, my gut says that your dad would say specific phrases or thoughts about you or over you that really shaped who you were. Now, my mom did this for me, right? Now, I grew up in the South, deep South, sweet tea, but it's syrup kind of South, you know what I'm talking about? And I was taught to respect women, and that wasn't just something we did, that was who a man was, right? So my mom, and I'll tell you as a kid, some of you know this, my mom, when I was growing up, my friends didn't do this, but she would make me open the door. So she would come to the door, this is second, third grade, and she'd just wait, and I'd forget, oh, my bad, and I'd walk over, and I'd open the door for her, she'd get in the car, and I'd walk back around. Some of you are like, that's nuts. But here's what it did, right? I just have an overwhelming respect for women because of that, like little things like that. I was doing that in second and third grade with girls. I do that now, right? This is a constant thing. Now you go that is a behavior, but behind that is actually a script around what masculinity is and what a man is. I've been in 3 fights in my life, right? 3 fights. 1, 2 out of 3. Thank you so much. That wasn't that funny. No, let's do it. They were all over women who were being bullied or disregarded or something around that. 2 of them were in middle school, right? I went 1 for 2 in middle school, but anyway. I'll say this, because I grew up to go, that's something that we fight for, right? That's a masculinity script. Some of you weren't. Some of you weren't given that script. Some of you have that script now, but you're responding to disrespect from women that you grew up with, right? And so what's funny, and this is why this matters so much, most of the scripts that you have around masculinity, it almost feels like it was draped over you like a blanket, that this is who you are and this envelops you, and this is what men do. But at some point along the way, most of us are also given masculinity scripts that feel like it's a mismatch from who we are, right? All right, so I'll put it like this way. At any time there's a mismatch, there's an insecurity. Some of you, when you're around your dad now or mentors now, right, you feel the mismatch and what you immediately feel is insecure. Some of you feel this around a father-in-law, right? Men do things with tools, right? When I was 22, 23 years old, my father-in-law is so good with all of that. He is unbelievable. I talked to him yesterday about a car thing, and he just looked at it, and he's like, yeah. And I was like, how do you do that? You know what I mean? I felt insecure because there was a script that was playing in my head that I should know everything about all those things. Now, I learned how to use a drill yesterday, but I would say I'm just kidding. But when you look at this, you go that's a script. And whenever there's a mismatch in the script, insecurity is typically what follows. As if all men are the same way, all men have the same strengths, all men tend to do the same thing. And when you raise boys, you know this too. those scripts are picked up on so incredibly quickly. Now, with saying that, and this is going to feel, depending especially on like your view on life and your worldview, a lot of the masculinity that we celebrate is actually a social construct that we've built for ourselves in Western culture, right? Now, some people go, all of masculinity is that. I don't think that's true. I actually think this is a spiritual thing. And we're going to talk about what this looks like. But a lot of it is, right? The fact that you would get on a phone and, what's the Liam Neeson line? I love this line. What does he say? He's like, I have a specific set of skills. Like if I said that, my voice would probably crack. You know what I'm saying? Like it'd be a moment. Now, but I love this. But I would go like, there are specific things in our world that are constructs to who we are. It's true about dress. It's true about how we think about things. Often it's true about how we portray men in the world. Some of it's a social construct. Now, I want to prove it to you just for a second, a little bit because I'm a history thing. I heard a message around this by a pastor named Andy Stanley, which was so good. And he references specifically this figure in history to paint a picture. I'll do this. How many of you guys remember Genghis Khan? You remember this from growing up in social studies? Just me? Okay, great. Genghis Khan, this is funny. How many of you played, what was the PC game? The War of the World? Was it? No, it was... Empire, Age of Empires. You remember Age of Empires? Yeah. Anyway, this is what I think about. Now, Genghis Khan was fascinating. I'm going to tell you why this matters so much, right? In terms of social scripts and how we approach masculinity. Genghis Khan was roughly like 13th century, right? Emperor, Mongolian emperor, did fascinating things. Was a genius when it came to military strategy. So just like when you look at what they, conquered was just fascinating. But one of the ideas that they held wasn't that just all men, when it came to having children, were engaged in this, but specifically he was, right? And so part of the social contract that was so fascinating was that he was to make lots of the children, right? Now, it happened so much, now this is so fascinating, that if you were to look in this, the estimate is that roughly 8% of today's men in this Mongolian area would have had one of the sort of specific chromosomes that would have been connected to him, which is just a fascinating stat. I want you to think about this. He had so many children, right? So many children that roughly 8% are somehow connected to this one man's lineage. Now you hear a story like that, and especially when we talk about monogamy and how families are built, you go like, that feels like monstrous in terms of a cultural context. But it would have been just very like, yes, this is what we do. This is who we are. This is how we approach it. And that behavior now is considered very abnormal. But masculinity in this specific culture was defined often by those kinds of things. Now, here's why this matters so much. Right now, if you look at other parts of the world, what a man is culturally is often different than the way that we talk about men here. And there's a thread between that I think is very connected to all men. But there are social constructs around this. And so the question I want you to answer if you're a man in the room, and if you're a woman in the room, I want you to think about this when it comes to your sons, specifically the men in your life, and that's this. Who handed you your masculinity script? Now, it's easy to say your father, but that's not true of all people. Some of you as a coach. Some of you as somebody that you looked up to, and the masculinity script was some version of this is who a man is, and this is what a man does. Right? I want you to think for a second. Who handed you that script? And the second question is like, and how often do you feel mismatched from the script that you were given? Now, I told you this earlier. I talked about my mom. We kind of joked about that earlier. I grew up in a single parent home. My father was never a part of it. Some of you have heard me tell this story before, but when I decided that it was time for me to shave, which was fifth grade, it was not time for me to shave, but I decided it was time for me to shave. When you have a dad in the house, you grab a Mach 3. Do you remember those guys? Like you grab whatever it is, it sounds like an airplane to shave your face with. But when you only have a mom in the house, I grabbed my mom's Venus to shave, right? This is how I started shaving, right? Yeah, some of y'all like, okay, that explains a lot, right? Now, I thought about this, right? I thought about where did I actually get the scripts that lay the foundation for how I view the world when it comes to this, right? And I remember I was trying to process what it meant to be a man. I was around all of these other men, coaches, this sort of thing. But I would go to church and we read a book, and I won't say the book because there are parts of the book I like, a lot of it that I don't. But we all read a book in our small group that was about manhood. And then we would watch movies that they recommended, and about half of them were rated R. And I'm like 12, 13 years old. So I'm like, yes, I'm here for that, whatever. And we would watch these things and we'd talk about it. And I remember the way that they painted Jesus as a man was so fascinating, and it actually built a script for me because there was now a weird dichotomy that I felt. The Jesus that I would read about as like a warrior, right? I'll show this, like a warrior version of the Jesus. And then there was like the sweet passive version of Jesus that it seemed like we celebrated as we sing As the Deer at the altar service every Sunday, right? It was two different ones, right? Now I'm gonna show you a picture that's gonna be offensive. It is offensive, right? And half of you are offended by a different picture. This is what's so funny. Like most of us are offended by one or the other, right? But this is what I came up with. Jesus was Revelation 19. If you never read Revelation 19, it's one of the most like it is William Wallace on a white horse, slaying all the enemies, coming back and ending it, right? That version of Jesus, or some version of Jesus with a Teletubby or something, holding it, sweet little lamb thing, right? That was the dichotomy that I was given. The problem with that is that the way Jesus actually lived as a man, right? Not just as God, not just as human, but as a man, actually lays a significant foundation around what it looks like to do this, right? And the question that I want you to think about for a second is this: which portrait really sets the standard for what a Christian man should be when it comes to Jesus? So here's what we're gonna do for the next few minutes. And then we're gonna end with an ellipses, and then we'll send you back for next week and we'll talk more about it. The picture of Jesus that I think gives the clearest picture of what manhood actually should have foundationally and what Jesus lived with is actually at the cross, right? Now, most of you know the story of the cross. We're not gonna go through all of it. But there's a guy who was gathering so many of these stories with eyewitness accounts. His name was Luke. He was a physician. He wrote it down. I'm shocked that we could read it. That's a doctor joke. Anyway, sorry, thank you. But he did. He got all these accounts down. And there's this one phrase that gets mentioned at the story of the cross that I think actually outlines what this looks like. So Jesus goes to the cross. He's tortured, right? He is unjustly accused, right? By simply human accounts, unjustly accused. A crowd chooses him over another criminal to be killed. So he's beaten and he carries his cross to the place where this is gonna happen. And what happens in this moment is actually a picture of what manhood actually, I think, is foundationally and what we're gonna build upon. So this is Luke chapter 23. Here's what it says. It says, the people stood watching, and this is the image that we get. And the rulers even sneered at him, which again, you probably don't say sneered very often, but you know it when someone sneers at you. Do you know what I'm talking about? They sneered at him, and they said this, and I want you to envision this. They said, he saved others, and they're being condescending, sarcastic. He saved others, so let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one. Now, here's the picture, and this is where we're gonna pause in a second, and we're gonna go on next week in a minute. He's here experiencing all of these things, unjustly there, and here's the part that I want you to imagine, here's the picture, with all of the power in the world. All right, so he healed people. He rose people from the dead. He fasted for 40 days and was tempted by Satan directly himself with all the power. We talked about that last week. He elevated women in a culture that continually devalued women, right? He gathered around him, which might be the most fascinating leadership thing that he did, a bunch of people who were literally rejected in their education and what they were pursuing at one point to be followers of a rabbi to move forward with him. He did all of these things. And the truth of the matter is that if Jesus wanted to walk off of that cross at this moment, he could have, right? He's nailed to a cross, suffocating in front of his mother, holding, don't miss this, all of the power in the world to do whatever he wanted to do. And it goes on and it says this. It says, the soldiers also came up and they mocked him. And they offered him wine vinegar. And the reason they offered him wine vinegar is your body, obviously, when you're bleeding to this extent, becomes very dehydrated so fast. And his body would have craved water. And so when you are given vinegar at this moment, it feels like something you need, but it only makes everything else worse. It is another part of the torture. They continue to torture him by trying to give him this vinegar, right? And so in the midst of doing that, they said, if you are King of the Jews, save yourself. Now, the other part that's contextually interesting to me in this is that he's not the only person to claim to be the Messiah. He's certainly not the only person to gather a group of people together who would have believed in a sort of a newer religion. This is actually not uncommon, and they killed those guys too, right? But of all the other people who had all of the power to walk off that cross and flex, or to do the LeBron James, I don't know, that's how I would have done it, in front of everybody else, to say, look now. Jesus stayed on the cross. When all Jesus would have had to do was to gain more and more power and influence to make the audience bigger. He didn't have to go and interact or save the women that he did in moments, that you see him elevating women. He didn't have to do that. He could have built it a different way and faster. When Jesus healed people, this is always another fascinating thing. He didn't have to just say yes to some and no to others, which is what he did. He could have healed them all and done it differently, but he chose not to. And we talked about this last week. In the moment that he's tempted in the desert, he's offered an enormous amount of power that was likely to be given to him, but not full authority, to which he rejected for the longer play. Not understand, which means that what Jesus constantly did was hold significant power and influence and authority, but he yielded it with so much purpose on behalf of others. In fact, the writings that you see throughout the New Testament are so fascinating because what you find is that when they talk about the cross, they talk about how Jesus gave himself for others. There's an area of the Bible called Philippians. It's so fascinating. It's so rich with theology, but there's this one paragraph that kind of talks about this in particular is what it says. Here we go. It says, who, talking about Jesus, being in the very nature of God or having the character authority of, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Can we just pause there for a minute? Never, my response is never, you know what I mean? If I could have yielded a little bit of that authority to dunk, I would have yielded a little bit of that authority to dunk. You know what I'm talking about? If I could have yielded a little bit of that authority for my own advantage, I'd have probably yielded a little bit or a lot of bit of that. It says he did not use that authority to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself, and can we say that next word? He made himself nothing. He made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death. And then they just emphasize it. Not just death, but death on a cross. And by talking about the cross, they're not just talking about the manner of suffocation that he went through. By talking about the humiliation that he went through on the cross, and don't miss this, for all of humanity, for all time. Which means he could have walked off the cross and he didn't. Which means that in the midst of being mocked, he held all the power and authority to walk off of it, and he chose not to. Which means he allowed himself suffering on behalf of others, for the benefit of others, to come back with more power and authority in his resurrection and conquer sin. Which means when you talk about masculinity, when you talk about what men do, we actually have a picture of God as male, as man, who came into the world, and he showed us foundationally what men do. Now there's this phrase that gets thrown around Christianity, which it's been thrown around so much that it almost feels overused. It's kind of like saying love, like you're saying, like I love my wife and I love hot dogs. You know, like I love those two things, but very differently. You know what I'm saying? Like it can lose its value. So y'all like, I do like hot dogs a lot. Anyway, you don't care about that, but I'm glad I told you. The phrase that gets used is the picture of what we see throughout scripture of who Jesus is. That Jesus embodied two images, the lion and he embodied the lamb. If we can go to the next one, all right? He embodied the lion and he embodied the lamb. Can we go to the next slide for me? Thanks. He embodied the lion and the lamb, which means this. Now I want you to actually just picture this as best you can, right? If you imagine me standing up here, right? On one side is a lion. One side is like the lamb and the softness up, right? I want you to picture this for a second. You look at those two things and go, there is a tension and it's imbalanced, but there's a tension between the two. And Jesus carried both, which means when we communicate about Jesus as one of the other, right, we miss a significant portion of who Jesus actually is. Humility, sacrifice, softness in some ways. And then an animal that carries all the power and authority and just walks up, and even though you're at the zoo, you see it, and even grown men go, yeah, that glass is good, right? That glass is good, you know? And you step back. This is the picture. This is what it looks like with Jesus. So I put it in my notes. This is where we're going to pick up. That's it. That men, Christian men, cultivate strength, power, and courage. And what they do is they yield it for the benefit of other people. Now, I'm going to say this, and this is where we're going to end. And I'm not going to resolve this yet. Some of you hear this, and you immediately feel inadequate because strength, power, and courage isn't what you feel, and you've stopped aspiring to because you just don't feel like that's you. And the reason that you don't feel like that, I think, is likely because of a mismatched script that you were given on what those things are. And I want you to miss this. That does not mean that you need to go do jujitsu every day and be John. You said John Wick. I was like, yeah, that's great. That's not that. It can be that, but it's not just that. This does not mean that you should be able to beat up everybody around you every day. That's not what that means. What this means is this, that God, I think, endowed you with, he gave you a specific set of gifts and strengths that is unique to you. And please don't miss it, right? That you are to steward with strength and for power and for authority, however it is that you've been given those gifts. Some of you are ridiculously intelligent and you see the world in a way that no one else sees it. And you go, that doesn't feel like strength, power, and authority. And I'm like, that is 100% strength, power, and authority when you steward it well. Some of you, you're that. You know what I'm saying? And I'm one of those people. I think that's pretty obvious. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you go like, you have an air about you that's like, that's the thing. That is to be yielded for the benefit of other people. Some of you are leaders in the room and you didn't choose to be leaders. You just came out of the womb a leader, right? You just were. You were in elementary school and you were influencing people in elementary school. You didn't even mean to. And somebody pulled you aside and they said, I think you're a leader. And you go, I don't even know that I want to be a leader. And then you started leading people. You go, I definitely don't want to be a leader. You know, you did that sort of thing. But it was a gift that you had. And not by any intent, you just lead. You just do. You speak and people follow. And you don't know why, it just happens, right? And what you've done is you go like, but I want to be like that, or I want to be like that. But God gave you a gift to steward for strength and power and authority that's not just for you. That's not just for your advantage, which means that leadership without self-sacrifice is not what Jesus has called you to. It is laying down your life for the people that he has entrusted you with, and he called you to lead. And that's masculinity too. I'll just tell you, however form those gifts show up in your life, God has brought you along, I believe, to steward that for other people. So here's where we're going to pick up, and here's where we're going to kind of wrap up our time, and that's this. For those of you in the room who feel a mismatched identity when it comes to some form of masculinity script that you were given, it doesn't take long to pull on that thread for you to know what that mismatched thing is. And every man has an insecurity somewhere, right? And you're like, no, I don't, that's just crap. You do. I don't care how good you hide it. I don't care how good you create walls around it. You have an insecurity somewhere. It's likely connected to a script like this. And here's what I want you to do today. It's the only homework that you have, and that's this. I want you to spend a week unpacking what that is for you. And if you're here and you're married and you're like, you have a husband and maybe he's here with you or maybe he's not, here's what I want you to do. It's gonna sound kind of weird. I want you to think about the masculinity scripts that they have, and I want you to talk to them about it. And if you have sons, here's what I want you to do, right? And this feels like a little inception-y, I know that. I want you to put all of the men who they look up to, right? And you know who it is. Maybe it's an older teen, whoever it is, all the men they look up to. And I want you to ask yourself, what masculinity scripts are they adopting along the way? This is your homework. And the reason I want you to do that is because next week what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, here's what this looks like practically to create the right kind of script within the context of men who decide to gather influence, strength, power, and then take all of that and wield it for the good of other people. Let me pray for us. Father, this that we're talking about today is, I think, very true, and you modeled it for us. And God, you gave us this picture, and what Jesus did on our behalf is the foundational picture, not just of masculinity, but for all of us in all of our lives. It's what it is. But God, I do believe that you have uniquely wired men to pull together these things on behalf of other people. So I pray for the man in the room who has adopted these scripts where they feel mismatched from what they were given. And the insecurity that lurks somewhere, either at the forefront of their mind or somewhere kind of far back in their subconscious. And I don't pray that they just get satisfied. What I pray is that it comes at the forefront of their mind and they replace whatever scripts those are with the unique gifting and calling that you've given them, partnered with the foundation of yielding those things for other people. Pray for the father in the room who feels wildly insecure about being a father. And maybe they have boys and they're responding in fatherhood to something that they were given either positively or negatively. Father, I just ask that you would help them to not feel sufficiency on their own, but come to the foot of the cross and lay down all of those insecurities with you and adopt the scripts that you've given them to live by when it comes to their masculinity. I pray for every husband in the room. I pray the core of who they are men who yield all that stuff, and they do it by laying down their life for their family. Pray for every leader in the room. Father, what I ask for every leader is that when they are tempted to leverage all of that influence, power, and strength for their own advantage or benefit, that they would decide not to do that and leverage it for others. And lastly, I pray for every woman in the room that if they were really honest, they wish their husband or their significant other was slightly different in some way when it comes to these things. Or maybe they're trying to figure out what it looks like to raise sons, to raise great men. Father, I ask that you would speak to them so clearly about what it looks like to raise the kind of men that you've called us all to be. And that by your grace, God, for all of us, you would help us to become more and more and more like Jesus. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.